faith. Those are the 6 reasons we felt it would be good to quit my job. Ultimately, we realized that passing up this opportunity would cost us more than taking it. Still, there are 2 things I wish we had done that might have made the first 6 months a lot easier. Rules. My wife was standing in the laundry room crying. My first inclination was to think that this was due to the difficulty of folding clothes for little kids. All those socks, those miniature sweaters, and pants the size of potato chip bags. Anyone can fold a load of towels. It takes like 3 folds. 30 seconds, tops. But kids' clothes multiply like rabbits when you put them in the dryer. A single laundry basket can hold hundreds of items. It can be very demoralizing. That was not why she was crying. She was crying because I was out of town 7 out of 8 weekends after moving to Nashville. During my 3 years at Autotrader.com, I was never once out of town for business. I used to get home every day at 4:30 in the afternoon. Now, in what was billed as my dream job, I was gone all the time. I felt unmoored from my family, as if I was not anchored in the same place they were, but was out floating somewhere. My wife felt disconnected from me, and my kids hadn't seen me in so long that they started calling me Denny instead of Daddy. It was a bad scene. How did this happen? We never talked about the rules. In the shadow of the overwhelming opportunity, we forgot to establish some new rules for this new life of ours. We never sat down and said, let's look at the calendar and make sure you're not on the road back-to-back weekends, if at all possible. Let's block out weekends in busy speaking months so that the speakers group knows not to book you then. Let's make a rule that we won't go X number of weekends without the family doing a big family event that doesn't involve the we. We came into the situation big on excitement and small on strategy. So when my team leader asked me to speak at all of the Dave Ramsey live events to thousands of people, I was thrilled at that opportunity and said yes. But I already had a fall's worth of my own events booked before I started my new job. My events plus Dave's events collided, creating situations where I was all over the place and constantly out of town. One weekend I flew to San Diego from Nashville. I spoke at 8 in the morning and jumped on a flight through Phoenix and Las Vegas before landing in Orlando at midnight. Saturday morning, I spoke at one of Dave's events and then flew back to Nashville that night. After stringing a few events like that together, my family was ready to kill me. And they had every right to, especially since I could have mitigated this by having some pre-established rules. For instance, if one of our rules had been no back-to-back weekends, then I could have discussed that with my team leader when the possible collisions occurred. Months after that bad stretch, I talked to him, and he implored me to let him know about things like that, because that was neither his intent nor the heart of the company. So if you do quit your day job for a dream job, try your best to have some pre-established ground rules to live by. You don't have to be married to make the commitment in the same way you don't need to be married to go on a diet. Think ahead to what you're planning to do and make some rules then. It's so much harder to do this when you're in the trenches. You'll cave in a lot faster too if your list is just loosely stored in your head or your heart. Quite possibly the worst place to store something other than your undying love and your feelings for Nutella. Write down some rules. They're going to change. They're going to grow. They'll even be a little flexible. During the release of this book, I will hopefully be on the road doing a book tour, which will mean more travel time than every other month of the year, for instance. But once you've got your rules written down, share them with someone who will hold you accountable to them. Risk list. My wife is sitting on our couch crying. Not really, but that last section felt so emotionally charged, I thought I would try to keep the vibe going. She wasn't really crying, but she was sweaty nervous. Thus far, I've described my wife as crying and sweaty. Great husband. I assure you that she is double T hot and wicked smart and the best thing that ever happened to me. We were talking about a mortgage on a house we were looking at. For some reason, buying a house in Franklin, Tennessee was proving to be more difficult than selling our house in Atlanta. Our first offer on a house fell through. Our second offer on a different house fell through. Our third offer on a third house fell through. And each week we got closer to our 1-year rental agreement being over, we got more nervous. It was easy to look for houses in the fall, but once we hit February and still didn't have a house, the end of our rental in July started racing toward us. With each month that passed, we knew we'd have to lower our standards and buy a house we might not love. We decided to name all the months. We called February Fun, because we still felt we had time to get a house we really liked. We named March March Madness because we'd probably have to buy a house we just kind of liked. We decided after that we'd have April Angst, being forced to get a house we kind of disliked. May we just called Mayhem, because if we weren't in a house by then, all sorts of nonsense must have broken out. Part of the pressure we faced was that in addition to there only being 3 houses for sale in Tennessee, I was also on a commission salary mix for the first time in my life. The pressure of that was starting to get a little terrifying. Book sales were no longer gravy. They were the meat and potatoes too. Advertising on my blog was no longer extra money with which we could enjoy cash pillow fights in the front yard. We started having money conversations we never had when I was at Autotrader.com. That job wasn't risky. It was steady and consistent, like a delightful geyser I couldn't get the copyright to mention by name in this book. The checks just came, right on time. Sure, it was subject to the whims of the economy, but barring massive layoffs, I knew I had a paycheck of the same size every 2 weeks. Now, the punctuation in our life had changed when it came to the money we had. Some months, it would be an exclamation mark. Look at the commission we got on the book sales. Other months, it would be a question mark. We got our paycheck and the commissions are down. Which area do we need to be extra careful on this month? Whether or not those fears would come to fruition didn't matter in that moment. They were what we felt. And despite the support network I mentioned earlier, we felt alone with a lot of these risks. We had relationships that were woven over a period of 6 years in Atlanta. You can't fast forward something like that in a new town. It was a season of doubt and sleepless nights. And looking back, I believe a lot of it could have been reduced if we had made a risk list. A risk list is exactly what it sounds like, a list of risks. Brilliant, right? That's why they wanted to put me on the cover with the arm fold of confidence pose. I wouldn't let them though because I'm humble. Before you quit your day job and pursue your dream job in a full-time capacity, make a list of all the risks that might come up. There will be some you don't see, but it's not difficult to brainstorm a few. Here's what our risk list might have looked like before we moved to Nashville. Friendships. Jenny will be leaving a group of girls she's been meeting with for 3 years and knows like sisters. Jon will be at work, surrounded all day by people, so he won't naturally feel as friendless as Jenny. Friendships taking a long time to form in Nashville is a risk. Travel. If speaking offers go as well as possible, Jon will be out of town more often at a time when the kids will be in a new city with new schools and will really need their dad around. Money. Websites fall out of favor in the blink of an eye. Ask MySpace or Friendster. If the traffic to StuffChristiansLike.net tanks and advertisers pull out, we will lose a significant portion of our ability to pay our bills. House. We can't buy a house until we sell our house in Atlanta. We'll have to rent a house. That means for at least a few months, we'll be carrying a mortgage and a rent bill at the same time. That's a huge financial risk. And so forth. That's what we should have done. We didn't. It ended up amplifying the stress when we actually dealt with those risks. You can't imagine how much better you feel when you can go back to a journal or a whiteboard, review a risk list you made weeks or months before and say, oh, this feeling we've got right now, we totally expected it. We're on the right track. This is exactly how we should be feeling. A risk list removes the surprise, which is actually one of the most agonizing parts of facing a risk. A risk list can turn your feeling into a confirmation that you're in the right place at the right time with a dream. That's a huge gift to give yourself. Create a risk list before you quit your job and chase your dream full time. It will pay significant dividends. The end. When you write books, they have to come to an end. You might not need to say that dramatically in some sort of flowing italics, the end. But you do need to actually finish the book. I suppose you could say, this isn't the end. This is actually the beginning, ... That ... is supposed to represent adventures and dreams and you not being stuck in a cubicle of shame for 4 decades. But that's an awful lot to ask of a ... Besides, we have worked our way through an arc of sorts. We've worked our way to something more substantial than hype. We started with a decision to keep your day job and make it an advocate for your dream job. We then progressed to defining your dream and falling in like with the job you don't love. Chapter by chapter, we marched until we arrived here, equipped with ideas and insights about closing the gap between your day job and your dream job. Or in other words, how to become the right kind of quitter. I hope you do. I hope you realize there are ways to do more of what you love and less of what you don't. I did it. From my kitchen, with a unibrow and a blog that didn't even begin with an original idea. It took hard work and early mornings. I had to grind it out sometimes, but it ultimately changed my entire life. I didn't realize that until the first time I flew back to Atlanta after moving to Nashville. For years, I flew into Atlanta to do the reverse Superman. I'd return from a weekend of living my dream, ride the MARTA train back to work, and change clothes in the handicapped bathroom stall. My dreams would disappear as I'd walk back into a sea of cubicles. But this time, there was no reverse Superman. I was flying into Atlanta to live out my dream, to speak to a crowd, share ideas, sell books, and then fly back home to my dream job. The feeling of landing in that city as a different person for a different reason was overwhelming and indescribable. Don't accept the lie that work has to be miserable and dreams are for other people. They are for everyone. I am living out my dream that seemed so far off on so many days. And if I can do it, this proves one thing. It can be done. By you or anyone who refuses to be part of the I'm but generation. It's time to begin closing the gap between your day job and your dream job. It's time to be a quitter. Epilogue. The 3 reasons you'll ignore everything you just heard. When I started writing this book, I asked people on my blog to send me their ideas about the I'm but equation. For example, I'm a teacher, but I want to be an artist. I essentially asked, have you ever felt trapped between the tension of a day job and a dream job? I expected to get 3 or 4 dozen responses because it was during the holidays, and I thought this might not be an issue everyone dealt with. More than 600 people responded. Some of them were lighthearted. I am a record-keeping and reporting specialist, but my dream since 12 was to be in the WWE. Far cry, I know. Some of them were sad. I tried to send something last night, but I just cried instead. Maybe I'll try again in a day or so. With hundreds of responses, you're bound to have a unique mix of people say a unique mix of things. But in reading through them and the comments on my blog, there were a handful of fairly consistent objections that emerged. Rather than dance around them or slowly unpack them, a word I learned from my counselor, I thought it would be better to just throw them on the table. Because more than just objections, I think these are the 3 reasons you'll ignore everything you just read in this book. Number 1, you think life exists outside your 4 office walls. This is easily the most common objection to all the content in this book. The theory is basically that you can turn yourself off when you go home. You can leave work at work and enjoy your real life. This is a fun thing to tell yourself, and I've said it hundreds of times myself. When my blog started gaining momentum in 2008, I distinctly remember thinking, my blog, my personal writing, my family, my church, those are the things that constitute my life. This is just my day job. This is a particularly deceptive thing to think because it starts off from a good place. I don't want to be obsessed with work when I get home. I want my family to feel like I am present. In the middle of dinner, my wife has said to me before, "Where are you right now?" She said that because I was not mentally present at home. I was still at the office. So the ability to leave work at work is a good thing. But when we take that ability to the extreme, we end up thinking that we can really have 2 different versions of ourselves, work me and life me. We believe we can separate the 2 cleanly with some mental razor blade. We can't. You can't spend 40 hours a week doing something and think it won't impact you. You can't spend half of your waking hours somewhere and think it doesn't affect you. You can't make a perfectly clean break between your life inside and outside work. If you've ever been chewed out at work, I promise you didn't forget about that the minute you were off the clock. If your girlfriend broke up with you or your husband cheated on you, you didn't spend 40 happy hours at work because that bad stuff happened outside your work life. You are one person. You're messy, and you tend to spill work into home and home into work. When you think about it, the "it's just a job" belief is crazy. Imagine telling a friend, I have to go somewhere 5 days a week, dedicate the majority of my waking hours to it, let it control my vacation and travel plans, and let it be the sole provider for my lifestyle. But I don't consider it part of my life. That friend would think you're out of your mind. Not only is it part of your life, it's dictating a large part of it. A variation of this belief is the equally popular, my career doesn't define me approach. Another way to say it is, work is what I do, not who I am. I do accounting. I'm not an accountant. I agree. Sort of. While I agree that your job isn't your identity, while I agree your whole life is not represented by your job title, it does indeed define you. Be honest and say what you really mean. My current career doesn't define me. If you had the job you really wanted, you'd love to have that be part of your identity. If you were a painter, you wouldn't say, I'm not an artist, I create art. You'd love to tell people, I'm an artist. And whenever a musician is interviewed, you'll hear this approach slip out. Well, as a musician, it's important to me that the sound of the album have a certain feel. And I'm not immune to that either. When I finally published a book, I couldn't wait to say, I'm an author, I'm an author. When I had lunch with my oldest daughter at her school and she told her classmates, my dad is an author, I was thrilled. That was a label I wanted to spoon at night and couple skate with at Roller Kingdom. I was more than happy that the word author was added to the definition of who I was. Was it the completion or the entirety of my existence? Not at all. But to say that being an author didn't define me, at least in healthy ways, would have been a lie. Plus, if you truly believe your life exists outside of work, that your job doesn't define you, what do you call those 40 hours? Death? Weekly purgatory? If you come in each morning with the attitude that you have to shut your life off and spend 8 hours not living, how do you think you'll actually perform? It always comes down to this eventually. You can fake it for months, maybe even years, convincing everyone you work with that you care about the company, the business, or the job. But your apathy for a job always comes out eventually. And when it does, you have 3 options. You can admit to your coworkers that the job isn't really your life. Some of them will understand, especially if you're working retail. But some of your coworkers will be extremely insulted to hear you say, this is just a job. This isn't my life. Some of them put passion and heart into what they do and will hear, correctly or incorrectly, that you hate that job and think anyone who loves that job is ignorant. Your second option is to just be a jerk. I've spent a lot of years pursuing the finer points of this particular approach. I was a bit of a punk in high school, but I really came into my own as an adult. I think being a jerk is ultimately why I got fired from my second job and essentially run out of the building at my 7th. I checked out of the 7th one about 3 months before I actually quit. My 2 weeks notice was supposed to be up on a Friday, but I was such a jerk that my boss asked me to leave abruptly in the middle of the day on Wednesday. I began clearing out my desk. 30 minutes later, my boss stood up in her cubicle next to mine and asked, what is taking so long, John? Just go. I think they probably would have gotten a security guard to toss me out on the street like a drunk contestant on The Bachelorette, but our building didn't have one. The few remaining friends I had at that company emailed me days later and said, why didn't you come say goodbye before you left? I didn't know what to say. Writing those paragraphs made me feel a little sick to my stomach. But that's the kind of thing that can happen when you try to live your entire life outside of work. I don't think you'll ever become as big a jerk as I can be. I'm special. But honestly, tell me if you think a manager at a company has ever said, you know when Mark became a great employee? Someone who is just an amazingly high performer? You know when that happened? When he recognized that this job is just a job and his real life is outside of these walls. No one will ever say that because it's next to impossible. And it's also a fairly poor way to impress the boss. So your first 2 options when you get tired of pretending to be happy or fulfilled or engaged at work are to, number 1, admit to all your coworkers that you don't think your job matters, or number 2, become a jerk. Neither is particularly fun, but there is a third option. Don't quit right away. If you quit your job without understanding why you're quitting, you'll just jump from job to job to job. You'll become a serial quitter like I was. The things you didn't like at the job before will show up in your next job, and the next. The common denominator in every bad job you've quit is you. That's why this third option is so significant. If you choose to not quit right away, you can begin closing the gap between your day job and your dream job. It's challenging, certainly, but it's completely possible, and it's what this book was all about. Number 2, you think your job just funds the rest of your life. Again, this one is almost right, which makes sense. If these objections were obvious and neon, we could all just dismiss them and get on with doing what we love with our lives. This argument is essentially my life is outside my job, only now we've thrown money into the equation. You've still got all the potential dangers that come with going to work with your body, but not your heart. Now you're going to work primarily for your wallet. The funny thing is that we hate this approach when we see it in other types of people. My friends can't stand the NBA because it's just some spoiled athletes who don't really care about their city or their team now. Gone are the days when being a Celtic or a Laker meant something, when Larry Bird or Magic Johnson carried the hopes of an entire state into the championship. Sportscasters and coaches have long bemoaned the fact that in college, athletes play for the name on the front of their jersey. In the pros, they play for the name on the back of the jersey. It's like their job funds the rest of their life. Same with musicians or bands. When someone gets popular or a band lets one of their songs be used in a car commercial their fans don't like, people are quick to call them sellouts. They're just doing it for the money now. It used to be about the music. Of course, the guitar player who practices nonstop and tours 200 days a year would probably call that work. But that's beside the point. They've lost their integrity. It's almost like their job just funds the rest of their life. You're not a musician. You're not a basketball player. Fine, neither am I. Actually played a total of 68 seconds during my entire 8th grade season. I was the skinny white kid everyone hoped would hit a basket in the final 4 seconds of every home game. But you don't have to be a basketball player or a bass player to see that the phrase, my job just funds the rest of my life, is no way to go through life. I don't want us prostituting ourselves for 40 hours a week. I also don't want to pretend that there won't be jobs or seasons when it will be primarily just about making the ends meet. I'm not going to glamorize a ditch digging job. Even at my dream job right now, there are tasks I do to fund other things. But I do want to rewrite that idea. I don't think we should say, my job just funds the rest of my life. I think we should say, my job funds my dreams. The word just strips away every other benefit of your job, leaving you only the money. Social interaction, the chance to do something that matters to someone, the simple act of accomplishing something, the chance to practice some aspect of your dream. We lose sight of all those things when we are obsessed with just funds. I don't like the phrase, the rest of my life, because it sounds like life only occurs outside of the job. And we know that is not true. I'd much rather us be deliberate about using our day jobs as fundraising for our dream jobs. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, I'm a doctor. I have a thriving practice, and the money I make from that allows me to do huge things in the lives of people around me. I can build wells and hospitals and a million other things because I'm faithful to my day job. What I don't want to happen is to have your job just fund your life without ever thinking about or working on your dream job. I don't want you to wake up at 65 and realize, I spent 40 of my best years doing something that just funded my life. Number 3, you think work is never meant to be fulfilling. Part of growing up is on some sad level accepting the math of the world, meaning we end up, for the most part, working to make ends meet rather than working to fulfill dreams. That is what one person told me. Another said, people just need to put things in perspective and realize that there is no golden cure to all of life's ailments. Those are depressing statements, perhaps, but there is truth to them. We do need to make ends meet. We do have bills to pay, and despite the sheer amount of awesomeness I have tried to pack into this book, I fear you did not find a golden cure to all of life's ailments in it. But who says following a dream is about having fun all the time? I didn't. Doing work you love is not about doing work that is fun all the time, or even feels good all the time. Regardless of your dream, there are going to be hard moments. You'll have to do things you don't necessarily enjoy or don't necessarily have an easy time doing. Anyone who tells you otherwise must have access to a magical unicorn named Cornelius who grants wishes with his tears. The danger in this type of thinking is that it dresses itself up like hard work or a can-do attitude, but often it's just a fancy way of hiding fear. The reason is that there's finality to this logic. The unspoken ending when someone says, who says work has to be fun all the time, is, so let's not try to change it at all. No one thinks, who says work has to be fun all the time, but I bet we can make it fun for some of the time, but someone should. Okay, I will. Ultimately, I agree that work will not be fun all the time. But I don't want work to be fun all the time. I want it to have meaning all the time. Even if you're doing a menial task that is way beneath you, I want it to have meaning. The least of things with a meaning, said the famed Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it. I know sometimes our day jobs feel meaningless, but they're always a great place to start dreaming. They're also a great place to start changing the world. That's what happened to me when I finally got serious about closing the gap between my day job and my dream job. In the middle of one of the worst economies in recent history. In the middle of a day job with busy work and paperwork and corporate memos. In the middle of knowing this can't be what I do for the rest of my life. I changed the world. I partnered with the readers of Stuff Christians Like, and we raised $60,000 in 25 days to build 2 kindergartens in Vietnam. And it all started from a cubicle. It all started in the tension between a day job and a dream job. I didn't quit my job so I could move to Costa Rica on friends and family's dime. I didn't eat, pray, love my way around the globe. I had a part-time dream and a full-time day job. And if you do too, I promise that's more than enough to begin doing something truly meaningful. Do it wisely and it will grow from there. Start where you are. Start with what you have. Start today. What's your dream? What's something that makes you feel alive that you wish you were doing? What do you hope is true of your life in 6 months, a year, 3 years? Sometimes, the first step to closing the gap between your day job and your dream job is to answer those questions honestly, out loud, to yourself. I want to give you a place to do that. So I created a toll-free number you can call. When you call it, you'll hear a message from me and can then leave a message for yourself. I'll never share or sell your number. I won't email you the message or make you check back on it ever again. This is just your chance to tell yourself out loud about the you you'd like to be. Here's the number. I hope to hear from you soon and often. 1-888-406-7640. Once again, that's 1-888-406-7640.
You have been listening to Quitter by Jon Acuff, read by the author. Recorded, directed, and edited by Joe Lesh at Creative License Inc. Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Recording copyright 2011 by Lampo Press. This production contains the complete text of the book Quitter, copyright 2011 by Jon Acuff. All rights reserved. Unauthorized duplication is prohibited by law. This Lampo Press production is also available in a printed book edition at your local bookstore. For a complete listing of all Lampo Press productions, visit daveramsey.com. Get more ideas about what it means to be a quitter, meet other people who are working on their dreams, and continue closing the gap between your day job and your dream job at Jon's blog, jonacuff.com. Follow Jon on Twitter at Jon Acuff. On Facebook, facebook.com/quitterbook, facebook.com/author Jon Acuff. Questions and feedback? Quitter@quitterbook.com. Hear Jon live at one of his speaking engagements or book him for your event. jonacuff.com/speaking.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.